Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is Ruth Hughs, and I'm joined, as you can see, with Jerry Strickland and Ross Guieb, and we're going to be speaking to you about Texas as an investment. We don't have a moderator, so excuse us as we sort of self-promote and explaining who we are and why we're here today and why we're excited to talk to you about Texas and what it may offer. So I am a partner at Kelly, Hart, and Hallman. It's a law firm with offices in Fort Worth, Midland, Louisiana, and Austin, Texas, our state's capital, where I work. Prior to that, I served as the Texas Secretary of State from 2019 to 2021, where I had the opportunity to oversee our presidential elections. You may have heard a thing or two about in 2020. And also in that role, I had the opportunity to work with our international partners on the relationship between Texas and other countries. We have 90 consular offices in Texas, 108 diplomats that are in our state. And through those opportunities, we often have businesses that are interested in coming to Texas, and you'll hear Jerry brought one of those businesses in the semiconductor space, so we're excited to share some of those stories. I also chaired the Workforce Commission, and we've heard a lot about the talent needed, and we're excited to talk to you about that and what Texas offers on that front. And currently I serve as the chair of the Texas Science Fair, which is sponsored by Exxon and the Workforce Commission, and hosted at Texas A&M, where Ross Gibbs serves as one of my board members and is also, of course, very involved with the Department of Defense and things in that nature that relate to quantum and semiconductor. We'll talk about that as well. And finally, I'm the honorary chair, the honorary consul to Spain in Central Texas. So it's very exciting to get to marry STEM, Texas, and Spain, and to be here with all of you today.
Is mine on? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Ross Guieb, and I am a career Army officer. I retired about 2 years ago, but now I work for Texas A&M. I'm the executive director for the George H.W. Bush Combat Development Complex. So in Texas A&M, the way we greet each other is we say, howdy. So if I say howdy, everybody's got to say howdy back. Howdy.
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 You got a little bit better than that. Texas can't hear you. Howdy.
Howdy.
So at my complex, or the complex that I work in, it's a startup. It's about a $180 million startup focused on specific needs, mostly a Department of Defense and the intelligence community. But a lot of why we're here, a lot of the reasons why we come is really just to talk about the rich environment that Texas brings. I'll tell you a little bit of story after Jerry introduces himself about how we moved. I did 3 tours in the Pentagon and how we moved a $187 billion portfolio to Texas and why we did that. And that's only to say that our organizations work very well together, and I'll share that in just a little bit. So, Jerry.
Well, I think you're going to hear a lot about collaboration and what that means, not just from the private sector and the public sector also. So my name is Jerry Strickland in Austin, Texas. I will say I'm an accidental tourist here today. I am not a scientist, nor do I play one on TV. But really listening to all of you today really brings home a lot of what's happening in the United States and in Texas about really the need for additional semiconductors, not just manufacturing, but the research and innovation. And so we're really grateful to be here. I'm the executive director of a group called the FABSS Texas Semiconductor Coalition, which was really born out of the semiconductor manufacturing operations in the state of Texas not having a voice and not being able to talk with folks about what they need to be able to succeed. We've all seen the supply chain challenges. We've all seen what really that meant to our everyday lives. Unfortunately, the industry did not have a voice, and for not having a voice, was not able to talk about the types of things that they need when it comes to increasing and expanding manufacturing. I'm also a principal and Texas director at the BGR Group. It's a multi-client advocacy firm where we work with folks all the way down to school districts, local officials, all the way up to the White House, and working with members of Congress, one of which you will see right after our presentation. We worked very closely with Senator Wicker on the CHIPS and Science Act. And so a lot of that is all about collaboration, which really is really the theme of our presentation today.
That's great. Well, let's get started. I guess as a beginning point, how many of you have been to Texas? Show of hands. Okay, great. Well, that's wonderful to see, and I'm glad to see that. I can tell you when I was serving as secretary, we would often have individuals from different countries coming and discussing where they were going to invest, and I think at least once upon a time that was considered you would look at the East Coast or the West Coast. And so we're seeing that evolution, and particularly after the pandemic, ever more so in Texas. And why is that? You know, in Texas, we really pride ourselves, you know, first of all, having the right governmental structure. Jerry and I both at different times and at one point together worked for our now governor, Greg Abbott, and we really prioritize having low taxes, reasonable regulations, and a skilled workforce, and emphasizing that and putting a lot of investment in that in Texas. And we're also just generally blessed with a great location and then a real emphasis on our infrastructure. So we have actually been the #1 exporter the state has been the #1 exporter for the last 20 years. For 10 years in a row, we've been the state that's been considered the best state for business in the entire country. So if Texas were its own country, and many Texans think it is, the great Republic of Texas would actually be the 9th largest economy in the world. We have the 2nd largest workforce with about 14 million people. And then in terms of infrastructure, we have the most FDI. I think we're at 33. 26 commercial airports. We share over 1,200 miles with our neighbors in Mexico. We have freight, rail, just anything that you would need to move product to make sure that you have the system in place to support all of your efforts and your work exists for you in Texas. And the governor certainly made a point of having the governor's university research initiative so that we can bring funding and we can bring all of the different components that make Texas successful. I can tell you during the pandemic, we certainly struggled, as many people did and continue to do, with supply chain issues and other challenges. But we worked hard to listen to the science, but also recognize the economic impact and component and figure out how we could work with companies to keep our workforce going and to keep those essential things that we needed in manufacturing and other sources available. So to your point about collaboration, as large of a state as we are, we do also kind of all speak Texan and work really hard to make sure that industries have the resources that they need, because what we know, and as the governor always says, when they succeed, we succeed. And so we're very much interested in trying to support and create that kind of an ecosystem. And speaking of sort of some of these investments and things, Ross, you're going to tell us how you got from the Pentagon to Texas and a little bit about U.S. Army Futures Command.
So my spin is a little bit different since in 2018 I was sitting in the Pentagon. I was the executive officer to the Secretary of the Army, and he wanted to start a new 4-star command focused on accelerating modernization for the Army and Department of Defense. So we narrowed down 314 cities to about 5 cities. And of the 5 cities, of the 5 states was Texas. And as I was on the committee with the Secretary to find that location, Texas was far exceeded the other 4 places that we visited. And a lot of that was, one, that the nature of how federal, state, and industry work together in one cohesive kind of organization or one cohesive family. The other thing was the R1 universities, or the top tier research universities in that area. They used what they called a research triangle or a triangle. What they sold us on was that you can have the metroplex of Dallas and all the universities there. You could have Austin and San Antonio was another location with top tier universities, and then Houston and College Station being the third leg of that stool. So they sold us on that. They also sold us on the culture of innovation in that area. And when I say culture of innovation, it's what we're talking about here today. Our colleagues before us spoke about innovation and what's needed. from startups to medium companies to large companies, but a lot of where innovation happens is in your startups or in your labs, and then those bigger companies help scale that. The other part that we were really interested in, at least my time in the Army, was access to funding. So we saw a lot, as we were watching, we saw a lot of movement of VCs and private equity firms and companies moving to Texas. So we watched that growth, we watched that move across, and naturally Texas became our number one choice to put a $187 billion portfolio from the Pentagon to Texas. And since then, since 2018, the theory has proven out that it is a culture where we can grow together, not only at the federal level, but at the state levels they spoke about, local and county as well. And we also knew not only the innovation of what happens at those universities or startups, but the access to people. And I think one common theme, at least what I've heard throughout the conference thus far, is that people is the key to making all these things work. You could have as much money, you could have the facilities, but without the people, you basically have nothing. So we really, appreciate the opportunity to speak and talk a little bit about why that was so important to us.
And Ross, you mentioned the collaboration between the state and that seamless collaboration. I really want to applaud Spain, the country of Spain, the government of Spain, and really Barcelona for looking at this as an issue on trying to get to the leading edge of it. I think that's one of the challenges we've seen in the United States with semiconductor manufacturing. For a long time, we had domestic semiconductor manufacturing up in the 40%. Over a period of time, for a lot of different reasons, cost cutting being some of them, we've offshored semiconductor manufacturing, only to see those numbers gradually go down. Supply chain shortage, geopolitical challenges that we're seeing, I think really brought to the forefront a real need to join back together, to have those conversations with government. They're not always easy conversations when you're having with government, because the conversations are always about money, and government is not always great at having those conversations about money. But I would also look to getting in early with Barcelona, with Spain, with the governments in the EU on graphene and that type of technology, and really supporting that is extremely, extremely important. I want you now, though, to think about maybe a town or a city close to you that's roughly around 16,000 people. These are not the cities like Barcelona. These are not the cities like Madrid or Paris. They're generally pretty small. In Texas, we call these bedroom communities. These are communities that at 5:30, the sidewalks roll up and things just stop. 16,000 people of a population. But think now, fast forward about 4 or 5 years in a little town called Taylor, Texas, a town that really the main employment centers around school district, centers around maybe some medical, some healthcare. This will be really the epicenter of what will be the leading edge of technology in semiconductors. So how does that happen? It happens because of that collaboration, because of communities who aren't afraid to say no. It happens because of companies who aren't afraid to take a chance on the little guy. And so you don't have to be a Paris. You don't have to be in Austin, Texas. You don't have to be New York. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley. You can really do this and plant a flag wherever you are welcome. And so I would really challenge you all to think in those terms of not being geographically constrained when it comes to semiconductors. So as Ruth said, I did lead an effort in the state of Texas with a multinational company to expand semiconductor manufacturing. It started as a $17 billion project. They now have approval for much more in terms of building out semiconductor manufacturing and really looking at really precise semiconductor manufacturing, something that hasn't happened in this country in a very long time. And the reason why that exists and that happens really is that collaboration. So it wasn't just going and talking to the county judge, which is our county administrator, much like a city manager. It's not like going to talk to the city manager and the mayor. It really is talking holistically with an entire group of folks to make sure that they're able to not only support that, but then to grow into that from the workforce standpoint. That's one of the things that we're really excited about with the Chips for America Act and the Science Act, is really taking a look at that workforce development. How do we get the biggest and the best and the brightest minds to be able to change course in their career to then support the advanced manufacturing that's happening in semiconductors that ultimately will help all of you in the technology of quantum and in really the emerging technologies that are happening. So it's that collaboration of working together with all of the organizations, with the federal government, working with state and local, that I think is really, really important. And it's also making sure that as scientists, as those who really are on the leading edge of new technology, new ideas, new deployment of those ideas, to get involved early with those conversations. It's much like the Semiconductor Coalition that I now lead. It's making sure that they understand the requirements for utilities, for electricity, for natural gas, for water, for all of the things that they're doing to conserve all of these precious resources, and making sure that you're having those conversations early. So all of these things happening in a vacuum can be very difficult because it takes more time for adoption, takes more time for deployment, and unfortunately takes more time for support. We were talking earlier, we were wondering what the photo visuals were going to be, and there is a little bit of fatigue when we talk too much about Texas, but I thought if we all said barbecue, maybe about 10 or 15 times, maybe we could change it up here, but I think we're a little bit late in the presentation. But I really want to say thank you to all of you, and look forward to visiting with you more just about how we've been able to tackle challenges. And there's still a long road, not just in the United States, but also worldwide, and for multinational companies that we represent and that we work with. And so really look forward to the conversations later today as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And you know, certainly Texas is known for its barbecue, and we have a lot of energy. Energy seemed to be a slide that came up every time the word came, so we've been playing with it and trying to figure out what that looks like. But it's so true. We have the Texas Enterprise Fund, which is a deal closing or finishing fund that is also very important for companies that want to move to Texas and really set up shop. We've seen Toyota over the years first start an assembly plant for their Tundras in San Antonio. Now they've moved their entire North American headquarters to Plano. During the pandemic, we saw SpaceX move down, Tesla. And so we continue, and this is not by a coincidence, you know, it's certainly because of the ecosystem that we create to really encourage and make sure they come in and they work with our communities. Taylor is 16,000. Most of our
We still haven't gotten to the brisket
right.
or the
Most
barbecue
of our
yet.
communities are rural communities, and they're also very small. I mean, so 90% of Texas is rural. So you hear about our larger urban cities, which is probably where those of you who have been there have gone to Texas, to Houston or Dallas. If you go to San Antonio, there's a big cybersecurity focus there. And so I think it's important to know how to navigate our landscape in terms of what communities and what makes the most sense for what you're trying to do, and then to make sure that we can provide resources to you in those spaces. And so we wanted you to know that Texas is certainly open for business, and that it's a space where you'll find a welcoming community that will make sure that we look at what are your needs and then how do we help and work towards fulfilling them. That's why I'm so proud of the work that Ross and I get to do with the science fair while we're working with children in middle school to high school, really elementary to high school. We know that we need to start early, and we need to start planting those seeds and creating that environment so that they do see the future and they understand the value and importance of STEM and technology. Many of our communities across Texas, they don't have the same exposure that other places or large cities, and so we're working on that. In fact, we're even working on bringing more broadband to Texas now in many of our rural communities. That's a real challenge. So we recognize there's work to be done, but we're so excited to do it and to work on it. And we want you to know that, you know, we love to have those partnerships. And so it's exciting to be in a space like this where we're really looking at what's next and how do we make sure that we're in that conversation and that we're helping to create an environment that will foster success for all of your efforts. And so, you know, to that, you work closely with the Department of Defense and specifically in Texas, but in general, can you share a little bit more about what you're doing at A&M?
Yeah.
And I should mention, I said howdy back, but the other university in Texas is the University of Texas in Austin, and I'm a proud Longhorn. Usually there's a rivalry, but I have to admit that A&M is doing some innovative work that is making me a little bit more of a fan than I had been in the past.
Well, one of the 9 critical technologies that Department of Defense has published is quantum science, which is perfect for us to be here. But if you look at the amount that they're leveraging in terms of dollars, it's not as high as you think, the Department of Defense, right? This is open source. I think it's like $100 million, which is not a lot for Department of Defense. Times have changed where, as you heard, I think one of our opening speakers spoke about ARPANET, the birth of the internet. The roles are reversed on the government having more research dollars than industry. I think now it's more industry than it is government, because there is a time where the government was leading in a lot of areas, and I'm talking not just ours, but many governments. But now I think they're more in a follow and support role because they know industry is moving so quickly, university is moving so quickly that they want to jump in when it's time to jump in. So we see that's happening throughout our different countries in the EU, having been stationed here numerous times. I just enjoy working together and collaboratively on some real complex problems. And I think the only way to accelerate that is we have to work together in order to move the needle on things. I think our previous speakers spoke about move the needle on things that will benefit us globally, not just one country. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to thank Zena for putting this together. She is a hammer, as we say in the United States, meaning she can fix any problem that you put in front of her. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks. You're talking about investment on the public side. I think it bears mentioning in 2021, Texas saw $10.55 billion in venture capital raised, where previously those numbers had been 2, 4. We were certainly lagging behind Silicon Valley, where you've got one street with all of this innovation. Come to Texas, you have so many large communities across such a large space that it's been a challenge, but it's one that we're starting to see that was double the amount from the year prior. And so investments are coming, and we want to be sure that we're ahead of making sure that we can really be ready for them, have the workforce. We don't have a state income tax, we're a right-to-work state. There's a lot of reasons that we're attractive to businesses and to companies, and we just want to continue with that success and make sure that we collaborate, because we do consider ourselves very much a global economy, a part of the global economy. We certainly all lived the pandemic in a way that brought to light kind of what it is that we have to offer in Texas, and I think many people have recognized that and are starting to look for that direct investment with our state, and we welcome that. And so thank you for kind of letting us bring that presence of Texas to this conference and have those discussions, because we very much are looking forward to those partnerships going forward. We've got a minute and a half. You'd like to say something?
We didn't change it to barbecue. or a Longhorn back there, but thank you all for your hospitality. And really, thank you for what you do. I mean, what you do here is changing the world and will impact the world. And let's all do it for the better. So thank you very much.
Thank you.